from my son. And my son told me that his mother had told him while I was in prison. And he wrote this letter and he's like, my mother told me that you're in prison for murder. And he said, Dad, don't kill. Jesus watches what you do. When I got that letter, like, I wasn't religious, you know. I'm not religious now, I was spiritual. But there was something about that just like struck me like in the most heartbreaking of ways. It's like I have a kid out here who I have let down and whose mother is telling him stories about me without context. And I don't have a way to reach out to him and say, hey son, here's all the shit that happened. And so I was like, I gotta turn my life around. And I can tell you, like, over the years, every time I got into some shit, I would just be like, all right, this it. This is the last time. It was always these moments of like, I'm gonna do right this time. But it was never about me. It was always like, I'm gonna do right so my dad doesn't have to come see me in jail or come bail me out, or my friends don't have to come, try to get me out of trouble. It was never a real thing. And so when I started journaling, I started with this essential question of like, man, how did I end up here? Because up to that point, I didn't think of myself as a bad person. Like, I didn't think of myself as like angry. I didn't think of myself as like, I didn't even think of myself as violent. I thought that I had just got into some situations that people provoked me in. And so I asked this question of like, man, how did you get here? Like, you're the smart kid. You're the kid that want to be a doctor and an artist, and how the hell did you get here? And so I started going back and I started asking myself questions based on, when was the first time you got arrested? And what led to that? And then what happened the second time? And when was the first time this thing happened and that thing happened, and who was responsible? And what I was able to do was I was able to go back and realize that I had all this trauma. I had all these traumatic things that happened to me as a kid, but I also had caused a lot of hurt. And I did a lot of things that really was like, no, actually you probably are a bad person. And so as I began to write and sort those things out, I realized I never finished anything. I started a bunch of things. I never finished high school. I was like probably one of the smartest kids in the class. Went to Job Corps, got kicked out before I finished that. Was going to go to the military, never followed up to take the test. So I was a consummate quitter. I started some stuff and would never finish. And so I said, in my journal, I said, listen, if you're going to turn your life around, you have to finish one thing. You have to challenge yourself to finish one thing. And so I'm looking around this cell and I'm like, okay, what can I do? I've done all the push-up challenges, you could do in solitary. And I was like, you should write a book. But you got to write the book in 30 days. If you write this book in 30 days, you can change your life. If you don't, you're going to die in prison. And that was my charge to myself. And now I'll tell you, like, in solitary, there's no, like, you don't have a word processor, typewriter. You can't even have like a regular ink pen because they're scared you're gonna like shank somebody or stick somebody. They give you this little flimsy plastic pen. And so I remember getting a pen. I got like a little pad of paper. I said to myself, like, it's no way possible you're gonna write a book in 30 days with that pen. This is not possible. And I remember saying to myself, this is what you always do. You always make an excuse. You always make a way to get out of being accountable. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna turn your life around, or are you gonna bullshit the rest of your life away? And so I sat there for a while and I was like, what if I roll this pen up in some paper? And I literally took some paper and I started to roll the pen up so it was firm enough and it was like the size of a regular pen. And I wrote that first book in 30 days. And I knew I would never go back to prison if I ever got out. Because at that point, I still didn't know if I was getting out.
So what did you write?
So the first book I wrote was a novel. It was a fiction novel. I love reading. You know, I was really fortunate to really be able to escape through books, you know. So I was like, well, I want to try to write a book, you know. And I love these stories I was reading. I was reading like Westerns, Louis L'Amour, one of my favorite authors, Donald Goins. So he had all these street books like Dope Fiend and, you know, Black Gangster. And it was like all this kind of underbelly, Iceberg Slim, Pimp. All these stories were stories I had read early on. And these guys, they were like me. Like Donald Goins served time in prison. And so I'm like, well, if these guys can write a book, then what if I give it a try? And so my first novel was literally about this girl who played street basketball. Her dad was like a street basketball legend. And so I wrote that book, and I remember just like, I had never felt a greater sense of pride in myself than writing that book on a notepad. And I still have the original books that I wrote in solitary confinement on notepads and on the back of paper. I'll send you some pictures of it. It'll blow your mind. And I remember writing that book, and I got out. So I write the book. This is some wild shit. So after I write it, I'm like, well, a book really isn't a book until somebody reads it. And so I climbed down on my floor, and I'm like, yo, like somebody want to read this book I just wrote? And I remember this guy at the other end of the tier was like, don't nobody want to read that bullshit? This ain't Oprah. so Joe, here it is. I'm trying to turn my life around. I'm like, nah, I got to shank this cat for disrespecting me. You know what I'm saying? So, but it was like, it ended up when he said it, you know, my ego, you know, it's like, I'm you know, I am on the yard, like I'm a shot caller. I can have you done, right? And then I stepped back and I was like, no, he actually just gave me a go. Like if I'm gonna take writing serious, I need to set a goal for what do I want to happen with my work, you know? And then another guy, he agreed to read it. And now, so I'm in solitary, so it's not like I can just walk out the cell and get a guy to book, right? So we would make these fish lines out of our underwear. So we take all of the string out of your underwear, you attach that to a toothpaste tube that you squoze all the toothpaste out of and stuff with paper. So you stuff it with toilet paper, wet toilet paper. Then once that dries, it has enough weight that you can slide it up and down the tier. And then sometimes we would use our socks. Most of the time I use socks. But you just unravel that string, and then you can slide it up under the door, and then you can, you know, attach whatever to it. And so I attached the book to it, man, slid it under the door, and I don't hear from this guy like all day. So now I'm like nervous as shit, because I'm like, it's my only copy. You know what I'm saying? Like I done gave the guy my only copy and he ain't responding. But then he came back to the door, man, and he was like, you know, that's one of the best books I've ever read. And I was like, wow. It blew my mind for like literally about 5 minutes, and then I thought about it. I was like, man, he in solitary confinement. He over there bored as shit. I could have sent him anything. I could have sent him a recipe. It'd be like, it's the best chicken soup recipe ever, right? So, but I was like, okay, maybe if I send it out, you know, send it out to people. And so I started sending my writing out to, like, I have a brother. He's my stepbrother. And like out of all my siblings, he's the one of us that's like always played better books. You know, he went to school, he went to college, he's an engineer at like one of the big three, and he just always done it better books. And I remember sending it to him, and he had never wrote me in prison. Like never wrote me in prison. I sent him the book, and I remember I still have his letter to this day. And he wrote back and he said to me, this writing is better than most of the people I went to school with. And I want to help you figure out, you know, how a path forward. And so just getting that affirmation for somebody who, he wasn't in the streets, he wasn't on a prison cell block, no, he had did it the right way. Like just that little boost, man, was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something, you know? And so I wrote my second book, and like right after that, and I gave myself the same thing. You got to finish it 30 to 60 days. And then I started a third book, man, and I went into the deepest bout of depression that I had experienced in prison. And it was because by the time I got to writing book 3, I realized I had this incredible talent and that it had always been there. And that I had let all the trauma, all the violence, all the street life overtake my life. And I'm like, I'm in this environment, I can't give birth to this dream. Like, so it was the most, like getting sentenced was like, my life is over. Not being able to actualize a dream based on a gift I was given, that was devastating, you know? And so I was going through this depression, and I did what I always would do, which was go back to those books. And, you know, I was getting heavy into philosophy, which was like the wildest thing. Is like, you know, growing up, you know, you hear philosophy like, oh, that's super boring, you know? But I was getting into all this philosophy, man, and I remember going back to James Allen's book, and it was really talking about this idea that you think into existence the life that you want. And if you focus your life on negative thoughts, you're going to only produce negative outcomes. And when I went back and I read my journals, I saw the pattern. The pattern was super clear of like, I bought into this negative narrative, so me being in prison was not a shocker to me when I went back and read through my journal. And so I said to myself, if this is true, and if this is absolutely true in the negative, then it has to be true in the positive. And I began to just refocus my energy on getting out of solitary. And I remember saying, if I'm going to get out of here, I need help. Like, they're not, like, the way it looks on paper, they're not just going to let me out, you know? And so I wrote this letter to the warden, and it was a super philosophical letter about the truth. And what I said to the warden was like, when I walked into prison, my statement was that I was not going to follow the rules, and that I was hell-bent on destroying my life. And I'm like, if you look at my record, you would know that I've honored my word. Like, at that point, I had probably, maybe I think about 34 misconducts. And they range from everything to dangerous contraband to assault on staff, assault on inmate, you name it. And I was like, so the thing you know more than anything else, I'm a man of my word. And what I'm telling you is that if you believe that to be true in the negative, I just need you to believe it to be true in the positive. And if you give me this opportunity to get out of solitary, I'm going to focus on 2 things. I'm going to mentor these other young guys, and I'm going to focus on becoming a writer. And I sent that letter to the warden, and the warden literally wrote me back. And he said, you know, despite my hesitation here, I believe you, and I'm going to advocate for you to get out. And so he began to advocate for me to get out, but he had to go through multiple series of like his supervisors because the assault was on an inmate. And so it took about another 2 years before I got out of solitary.
The assault was on an officer?
Yeah, on an officer, yeah, on an officer. And so it took literally another 2 years before I finally got out.